On today's show, we continue our countdown to the best prospect pool in the NHL. Our prospect pool rankings continue. Teams number 14, 13, and 12 are up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related to you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hattie Kalakash, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be looking at teams number 14, 13, and 12 in our personal prospect pool rankings. Team 14 is Dallas. They're up in the first segment. Team 13 is Washington. They're up in the second segment. And in the third segment, we'll look at team number 12 in our rankings, and that is the Detroit Red Wings. What we do is we look at the top 5 prospects in their pool, age 22 or under for skaters, and age 24 and under for goalies, all of which need to have played under 41 games played. So it's a top 5 with a bunch of honorable mentions. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get up to $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As usual, if you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get it started right away here with team number 14 being the Dallas Stars in our rankings. They've always had a decent ability to draft players and develop them, leading back to the 2018 NHL draft, which was an absolutely ridiculous one with the likes of Jason Robertson and Jake Ottinger and a bunch more picked in the same draft. That trend has continued. Miro Heiskanen as well, who I forgot somehow. This is a great drafting team. So let's get right into it with their top 5 in this year, starting at number 1 with a clear, I'd say, number 1 prospect, and Logan Stankoven, a guy we've both been rooting for the longest time. Talk me through his game and why he's number 1 in this pool.
Well, first of all, he should have been a first-round draft pick in his draft year in 2021, and somehow fell all the way to 47th. And to that, Dallas said thank you very much, both nabbing Stankoven and Wyatt Johnston in the top 50 that year. Stankoven is a 5'8" spark plug. Despite just being 170 pounds, he plays with rampant physicality and intensity and energy. His shooting ability, his playmaking, his hockey sense are all way above average in terms of not just NHL projection, but they're there already now. I mean, he showed that last season in 24 regular season games. He scored 6 goals and 14 points. Also played quite well in the playoffs there for Dallas. He's a relentless worker, and beyond that, he has a combination of that intelligence and all the skills that he needs to succeed as a smaller hockey player. He's a decent enough skater to make his game tick, and he's a player that we've both been very much cheering for since he was draft eligible, and his stock has only been rising since then. So he's a pretty clear number 1 prospect in this Dallas pool.
Absolutely. I'd say, it's interesting we bring him up at number 1. If people are wondering about Wyatt Johnston, by the way, over 41 NHL games played, he's not eligible. But to go back to Stankoven, there's a reason he featured in our episode where we discussed how undersized players can succeed in the NHL. He is the definition of a spark plug. No one outworks him. He's just pedal to the metal at all times, but is also incredibly intelligent. He has a bunch of subtle skills in order to get to the middle, to create turnovers for his team, to steal pucks on the back check. He's got a bunch of tools there. But let's move on to number 2 here in Mavrik Bourque. Another undersized player, 5'10", 176 pounds. He was drafted in the first round, 30th overall, in the 2020 NHL draft, and just an overall very skillful player. Great playmaker with really high-end hockey sense. He's capable physically as well, despite his size. He's a good shooter. He's a great puck handler as well. So he's got a great basis of puck skills on top of a really, really smart processing brain. Incredibly clever, loves to draw players into him and kind of move pucks up the ice that way. He's always kind of taking one defenseman or one opponent overall out of the play with each pass he makes. So there's just a great foundation of skills there. He scored 77 points in 71 AHL games this past year, got into 1 NHL game. The odds are he's going to be playing with the Dallas Stars this upcoming season. But I want to see him in a true bona fide, offensive role. I don't want to see him be placed in a bottom 6 complementary role or anything like that. He needs to be able to drive his line to be effective. If they can find him a spot in the NHL where he can do that, I think Mavrik Bourque's up for a great season this upcoming one. Let's move on to number 3, a prospect that we're both pretty divided on. I'm not as big a fan of him, but you're a big fan of him, and he's been having a pretty good preseason so far. Leon Bichsel, this towering left-handed defenseman. Talk me through what you like in this game and why he's at number 3 here.
It's the combination of mobility and physicality for me. I think that he has some really intriguing upside in terms of defensive impact. His on-puck play has never been the biggest area of strength, and I don't think that will ever be the case in his NHL career. He can really panic under pressure. We've seen a lot of like puck over glass penalties that he's taken since being drafted as well. But his like just rampant physicality and really good habits in defending the rush, I think that Dallas could definitely mold the 6'6", 216-pound left shot defenseman into a very capable like middle pairing guy. He's going to have to be like paired with a better puck mover on his right side. Yep. But he has some of the skills that I think are going to make him one of the better like rush defenders and net front clearing defensemen in the division for Dallas. So I think that there's a lot to like here, even though his weaknesses are very clear. I think that there are also a set of weaknesses that can definitely be alleviated when they're complemented with a really good like pairing mate who can move the puck really effectively. And I think Dallas should very much target that style of player down the right side. I don't know if Aaron Manishin or Christian Kyrou are going to end up being those guys alongside Leon Bichsel, but he's an interesting prospect overall. And for him, I think that like it gives him a slight edge over the next player that we have here at number 4 in Emil Hemming, who's a really good shooter there from the right wing. Good frame as well. He was just drafted 29th overall this past draft, and at 6'1", 201 pounds, and a really, really wicked release. There's a lot to like in this player, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But on top of that, he's not just all shooting. We've seen that before with players, and it doesn't really work out. But with Hemming, what's really interesting is he combines that goal scoring skill with a great ability to move up the ice, to carry pucks through lanes. He's able to kind of wriggle past a player at full speed and transition to get to the middle, to get a shot off. He's got some great hands as well, which complement his play really well. And he showed some decent defensive ability as well in the SHL. In the Finnish Liga, rather. We saw him play kind of a more shut down defensive role against pro competition in Finland's pro leagues, and I think that can translate fairly well. It gives him a decent floor. It gives him an ability to uplift his game and kind of have a foundation to work with if the shooting doesn't translate, if some of these other higher end puck skills don't work out. He's still able to fall back on a more defensive, more physical, more kind of checking role on the line. So he's got a decent combination of floor and upside that made him, for me, a true first-round pick by the end of the year. And it took him a while to get there, though, right?
It did, but I'm really looking forward to seeing how he's going to progress this season, because he's moving over to the OHL with the Barrie Colts, where he'll be playing potentially on a line with a guy like Cole Baudouin, and he'll also be joined by 2 other Dallas prospects on that team with Tristan Bertucci and Brad Gardner as well. So he's going to have some friends that might accompany him for a decent amount of his career there as well.
Absolutely, and that brings us to number 5 in Ayrton Martino, a prospect I've always been a big fan of. He's another undersized player, 5'11", 160 pounds, but he put up a really good season with Clarkson University in the NCAA, 27 points in 31 games. He's an above-average passer and thinker of the game. He's very much a playmaker first and foremost, but he uses his playmaking incredibly intelligently to move pucks, to move into space, to play give and goes. A lot of really interesting kind of playmaking details in Martino's game. I wouldn't say he's particularly a very physical player, and he doesn't really overcome his lack of size with any particular hard skills, but he's still a player who can make plays at a high speed, who can think really intelligently in the offensive zone. So I wouldn't count him out as an NHL player at all. I think he's going to be in that mold of Bourque and those kinds, maybe a lesser skilled version of that, but still a player you'd like to have in your pool. So he makes the top 5. You also have Aaron Manishin, who could have made the top 5. There was definitely an argument between him and Martino. If you're talking about a perfect potential D partner for Leon Bichsel long term, I think Manishin fits that perfectly, right?
On a third pairing, I think that would be a fantastic combination. I think if that's a second pairing long term, I'd have some question marks there.
Yeah.
I'd probably be looking. I think that Mnuchin's probably going to top out as like a number 5 guy at the NHL level from what I've seen so far from his college tape, but definitely a complementary toolkits. And I think they could also really help each other elevate one another's games because they really do compensate for a lot of each other's weaknesses. But yeah, I think like the last couple of players we still want to give a shout out to, I already mentioned, but Tristan Bertucci is a relatively interesting defensive prospect who's been developing with Barrie. Christian Kyrou, we also mentioned earlier, has some interesting offensive upside, but has stagnated a little bit in his development. We'll see how he does in the AHL this year. And Matthew Semenoff is a player that I think both of us have a decent amount of appreciation for with how he thinks the game, despite being a really subpar skater and not very big. He's an incredibly intelligent player with a really good first one or two touches with the puck and is very efficient with his play on puck at the WHL level. But I think that kind of wraps up the highlights from this pool, does it not?
It does, yes. And we'll move on to number 13 in our pool rankings with the Washington Capitals in just a second. But just before, a quick from our sponsors at FanDuel, at PrizePicks, and Indeed.
PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my packs hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means that you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks does not hit. I always love taking my swings on the dynamic skill of players. So whether you like your Connor McDavids or your Leon Draisaitl's, those are always the players that I tend to take my biggest swings on. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly. You don't even need to win to receive your $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game.
We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't a search at all. Don't search. Match instead with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's the matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates incredibly quickly. You can dish the busy work and use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging all in one place so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't help you just hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to Indeed surveys. So one of the things I really like about Indeed, I got my day job through Indeed as an employee, and I found it super easy, super straightforward. There were no secrets. You know exactly what the salary ranges are, exactly what the criteria and qualifications are, and exactly what the job description is. So you know exactly what you're looking at, and you can make a decision based on what your qualities, what your qualifications are. So that's what I like about it as an employee. I can only imagine how much easier it is for employers to use and leverage in order to get the best team set up for themselves. And listeners of the show can get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job with more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you've heard about Indeed on this podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, we'll look at the Washington Capitals prospect pool. They come in at 13th overall in our prospect pool rankings, and they've got a couple of prospects that are really, really interesting and a decent amount of depth as well that they've added in the past couple of years. I think we could start at number 1 here with Ryan Leonard. I think he's the clear-cut number 1 prospect in this pool, and he's developed incredibly well with Boston College, hasn't he?
He absolutely has. Like, this is one of the players that I most enjoy watching that are not yet in the NHL today. Everything he does is something that I think every single fan of the game, coach of the game, player of the game can find a lot of appreciation in. He is super high energy. He plays with rampant physicality, has a wicked shot. He's an underrated playmaker. The handling ability can dissect defensive structures at the NCAA level with relative ease. He's a solid skater. The defensive IQ is really high. The defensive engagement is even higher. He makes a difference in every zone on the ice, and I think that he projects as a really, really, really easy to project top 6 winger and likely even top line winger at the end of the day. His upside is really high, and I thought that last season with Boston College, while Will Smith stole all the headlines, I thought that Ryan Leonard was playing just as good, if not better, hockey than Will Smith or even Gabe Perreault. Like, all 3 players on that line were among the elite of the elite in the NCAA last year, but Leonard has always been the one that's been the most projectable to the NHL style of play, and that I think has very much a floor of being a consistent second line producer with a real defensive upside on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us to number 2 here, and we have Andrew Crystal at number 2. And there was a debate here between 2 and 3, but I slightly prefer Andrew Crystal's upside. He put up 111 points in 62 games with the Kelowna Rockets in the WHL, and it helped to finally have someone to pass who can actually put the puck in the back of the net, and TJ Ginla, who we're going to talk about in, I'd say, 2 episodes. But Crystal's really interesting. A high-end passer, high-end thinker, high-end stick handler, really good shooter as well. He's got a true complete offensive skill set. The only things working against him are his distinct lack of physicality and his below-average skating stride. In the NHL, you can have one or the other. You can't have both of those weaknesses. So I think that with Crystal, the most likely culprit to develop properly is going to be the skating. I think that it's more likely than not that he becomes a better skater than that he becomes a better physical player, because at 5'10", 175 pounds, the odds are stacked against him, right? But overall, I think that there's a decent chance that Crystal develops his skating well enough in order to become, to basically do everything he does right now, but at a higher pace with higher foot speed. And if you give Andrew Crystal even slightly better skating, you're getting a player who's going to be absolutely mesmerizing. Again, his skill set is off the charts. He's one of the best playmakers outside of the NHL, and a really, really good stick handler on top of that. And again, he thinks the game so incredibly well that, with the right development, with the right amount of time offered to him in order to improve these things, I think there's a chance Andrew Crystal ends up being a top liner, a true top line driver who can, just turn defenses inside out. A lot needs to go right, but that's my take on him. We also have Ivan Miroshnichenko, who's been developing fairly well for the Washington Capitals. 6'1", 185 pounds. He played 21 games last year in the NHL and put up 6 points, on top of being half a point a game in the AHL. And for me, you're looking at a player who has all the physical tools that Crystal doesn't, all the speed that Crystal doesn't. But there's a definite step back in processing, awareness, and all that stuff. And that goes back to his draft year. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone who's watched him over the past couple of years, but he's developed fairly well, hasn't he?
He has, and especially if we're comparing him with Crystal's 2 clear weaknesses might be Miroshnichenko's 2 biggest strengths. I think his shooting's definitely in there as well, but his physicality and his mobility are 2 of the things that really allow his game to tick, and have also contributed to him translating to the NHL at a relatively young age, despite battling with Hodgkin's lymphoma in his draft year. To have NHL games under his belt at the age of 20 is really impressive, and the physical tools have always been like way above average with this player, and I definitely think there's still some growing room with him in terms of becoming an impactful offensive producer, and having him on one line and Ryan Leonard on another long term is going to be really, really nice and quite a luxury for the Washington Capitals to work with. I also think that both of those players would pair very nicely on the opposite wing of Andrew Crystal. But we have a couple other players we want to talk about here in this prospect pool. And let's start off with your favorite player from last year's draft class, at least it always seemed that way, in Tarek Parasak. Why should Washington Capitals fans be elated to have him in their pool?
He's an incredible thinker of the game. He's just got high-end hockey sense, and he understands the game at a profound level that honestly astounds me sometimes as a viewer. The amount of times I watched him last year, and he would see a pass at me from, watching tape from a vantage point like I do. I didn't see that pass, or the way he moves off the puck, the way he finds lanes. The way he's constantly first on retrievals, despite being a below-average skater. These things compound, and usually players are able to circumvent their issues pretty well when they're this good an off-puck thinker. So when you think of, the below average skaters that are in the NHL, all of them are elite thinkers. You think of Tyler Toffoli, you think of, Brock Nelson might be in that category as well, depending on how you view that. But yeah, every single below average skater is a high-end thinker to make the NHL, right? And I think Parasak has that, and he has the skill as well. Great shooter, great handler, great passer. there's decent things to work with there, and he's defensively responsible as well. Played a ton on the PK for Prince George there on a stacked team as a rookie. We also have at number 5, Ryan Chesley, a big right-handed defenseman. He's mainly a defensive defenseman, a shutdown guy, but there's some decent puck skills as well. He's a decent passer. He's got a heavy shot from the blue line. He's a pretty linear, straightforward thinking type of prospect. He's not necessarily the type of player who's going to wow you with his reads, but he does his job well and is probably going to be a really reliable number 4, number 5 defenseman in the NHL someday. Then you have a bunch of defensemen: Cole Hudson, Leon Mugli. You also have Eric Smatejko, who's been looking really well. Who's a bigger forward here, who plays a pretty heavy physical game overall. At 6'4", 210, he's definitely got the frame to make the NHL. It's just a matter of whether or not his reads can get up to par. A couple other pieces. Vincent Iorio is kind of in the same mold as Chesley, as this physical, towering, more straight line, less kind of finessey defenseman. And then a couple of intense players in Peter Sikora and Ilya Protas round out the prospect pool there for Washington. Anyone in there that I forgot to mention? Or
I think you hit all the names that I wanted to talk about there.
Perfect. So we're going to move on to our number 12 team in our prospect pool, in the Detroit Red Wings. But just before we get into their prospect pool, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Hey NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Whether you want to take your swings on the NFL or any other sport, the choice is up to you. Of course, alongside American football, you have European football now going off in full swing for the new season, with the first match day of the Champions League now in the rear view, and all the leagues are really getting going at this point. Or maybe you're more of a tennis or a golf fan. The choice really is yours with FanDuel. You can take your swings on whichever sports tickle your brain in the right way. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com.
Alrighty, so let's close things off here for this episode with team number 12 in our rankings. We'll look at the Detroit Red Wings and their deep prospect pool. I mean, they've got a decent amount of prospects that look really, really well so far. Let's start at the top end. It was a difficult argument because I feel like there's 7 players that go in this tier, in the same tier with Detroit. But at the top end, we've opted for Sebastian Cossa, the towering 6'6" goaltender who's played a decent season in the AHL this past year. He put up some decent numbers with them. And for a player this big, I mean, it's really important to be mobile in the crease and not be heavy on your feet, to be able to move post to post fairly well. Cossa has all that. And there's a reason why he was picked in the first round in this draft year. He's developed really well in the past couple of years and is looking like a future star in Detroit. He's not the only goalie that's looking really, really good in their pool, but we'll get into that in a second. Sandwiched between the 2 goalie prospects for Detroit is Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, their recent first-round pick in the 2024 NHL draft. Talk me through his game and why you were so high on him this entire season, basically.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of this player. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard plays the game like an NHLer already. We said this the entirety of the last draft class, but he was one of the players alongside Macklin Celebrini that could have already been playing like at least 4th line minutes in the NHL as a 17-year-old. Every physical tool he has is already NHL caliber, whether it be his skating, his physicality, his puck handling ability, his shooting, even the playmaking really took some big steps towards the end of the season. His trajectory as well, from just being a bottom 6 like checking type of player towards the beginning of the year for more IK and Hockey Allsvenskan to being one of their like chief offensive producers by the end of the year was also very promising. And he's a really intelligent player who knows how to create advantages for his team in all 3 zones. He's very aware of his physical strengths. He's aware that he can make a very big impact in the defensive zone as well. He never stops working. The motor is ceaseless. And his floor is at least that of like a very, very, very good 3rd-line winger. And I think there's ample room for growth in terms of achieving a top 6 projection as well, with especially the goal scoring really potentially carry him into real offensive production that you want to see from a top 6 type of player. But as you mentioned, there are like so many other players that are exactly in this tier. So the distinction between Brandsegg-Nygard and the 2 other forwards we'll get around to later on, and Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson, is small, stylistically also very comparable players, but we ended up giving the edge to Michael Brandsegg-Nygard because the level of refinement and polish in his game as a draft eligible just can't quite be compared to even the two other ones who were quite polished in their respective draft years as well. But we like Michael Brandsegg-Nygard a bunch. But talk me through the other goaltender here, because Trey Augustine is, even though Sebastian Cossa is in this pool, one of the better goaltending prospects league wide.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes Augustine so interesting is just he's just a savior. Like he he went to the US and TDP, looked amazing for them, oftentimes compensated for their lack of true bona fide defensive defensemen by just being really, really clutch at the back end. Then he went to Michigan State University with the Spartans, played behind the likes of Artem Levshinov and Isaac Howard, who, as good as they aren't necessarily players who are reliable in terms of decision making. So that means tons of breakaways against. And he was stopping all of them. He's just always been this clutch, reliable, mentally sound goaltender who constantly makes saves at big moments, constantly shows up when he's needed the most. He's been key for USA at every level internationally as well, whether it's the U18s or the World Juniors or whatever it is. He's always been money for them, including in their most recent World Junior run as they won gold. He was key for them as well there. Just a reliable, intelligent, athletic goaltender. He's 6'1", so he's below average size in terms of what teams look for goalies, but he was impressive enough that that the Red Wings picked him up 41st overall, so just outside the first round in the 2023 NHL draft, and he's been money since then. So great prospect as well. We also have Axel Sandin Pellikka here at number 4, who's a fantastic puck-moving defenseman. He's had a great season in the SHL as well, right?
He absolutely has. He scored 10 goals and 18 points in 39 games last season, in a role that was very much like a second pairing one for most of the year. And I know he played a couple games as well on that top pairing. And he also played a really big role at the World Juniors for Team Sweden, where he scored 6 points in 7 games there, very much leading the charge offensively from the blue line. And this is a player who moves around the ice so effortlessly. He's a bit undersized at 5'11", 180 as a right shot defenseman, but he was still drafted 17th overall, which was a fall in terms of draft stock from where he probably should have gone and where he was expected to go at the time. But combining that high-end mobility with a booming shot from the point, really good playmaking as well. He's a fantastic distributor of the puck in the offensive zone. And combine that also with high-end intelligence and puck handling ability, and it makes him very dangerous, not just on the cycle offensively, but in leading the breakout, not only as a pass, but also as a puck carrier. He's really adaptable and versatile in how he is able to make his mark on the game, especially with the puck on his stick. And while I think that his defensive game and his maybe transition defending could probably still improve a little bit before he makes the leap to the NHL, there's a lot to like with this player. And with the way that he thinks the game, I don't have many concerns of him being able to make it work in at least a middle pairing role at the NHL level.
For sure. And then after that, we've got two players who are basically a toss-up, Nate Danielson and Marco Kasper. Basically the same player, I want to say. There's so many similarities between these two profiles. Both are reliable, physical, two-way centers who pride themselves in the details, who have a bunch of great stick work and physical tools in order to pry pucks off of opposing forwards and move the puck the other way. Reliable, intelligent, mature players who also have some puck skill. I'd say Danielson's kind of the more shot-leaning player of the two, whereas Kasper's a bit more of a playmaker, but both of them are still very much capable in both areas of the game. So pretty well-rounded profiles, guys who probably won't end up being top-line forwards at any time in their careers, but really round out the middle six. I think if you put the three guys together of Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, Nate Danielson, and Marco Kasper on one line, I don't think opponents are getting one shot on that. Like that's just if all three of them develop the way they can, that's a ridiculous line in terms of potential there. But then after that, you have a bunch of defensemen that look really well for them. Shai Buyam, William Wallinder, Anton Johansson are all in that mold of kind of reliable defensemen who can still move the puck, who can still make plays. Buyam's a bit smaller than the other two. I think Wallinder's 6'4" and Johansson as well. So, Detroit and their Swedish prospects, that's a match made in heaven every time we see it. But they also have some decent forward prospects aside of that. Elmer Soderblom is still eligible for this ranking. 6'7", mobile center, surprisingly for his size. with decent skating, decent defensive abilities, decent intensity, obviously great physicality, but also a great playmaking and goal scoring touch. He's looking interesting as well. Dmitry Bolchenikov is also in that group. Carter Mazer, who just came out of the NCAA, is looking great as well. So a great group.
Without even mentioning guys like Max Plant and Amadeus Lombardi, like there's a lot of depth in this pool, and a lot of like sneaky skill guys deeper that you dig in this pool, which I like to see, especially because the top end of the pool is at forward at least very much doubling down on one specific mold of middle six forward, which is fantastic, but you can't have your entire lineup only consist of those players. But overall, a really, really strong pool for Detroit. And I mean, not a single player in this pool was drafted higher than, I believe, like what, 9th overall or something? Because Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson were the 2 top 10 picks here. But a lot to like here for Detroit.
Absolutely. It's a great poll. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. As usual, remember to like and subscribe if you like the content. Leave us a comment down below letting us know what you think of our rankings, what you think of Dallas, Washington, and Detroit's pool so far. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, as usual, please leave us a rate review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our future shows as we continue our prospect pool rankings and move our way up to first overall. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.